Hi everyone, and welcome back to Gaining Kitchen Confidence, the first program in our 4-week Fast Track series. My name is Dina D'Alessandro, registered dietitian, nutritionist, founder, and chief executive life changer at DishWithDina. I've helped hundreds of patients and clients over the past few years meet their health and wellness goals, and I am so glad and grateful that you're coming back to join us on this, the final week, week 4 of this Gaining Kitchen Confidence program. So even though we are officially coming to a close with this program, this is going to stay here for life. So you can easily revisit any of these videos in the future, but even better if you not only just like and comment below, but subscribe to the channel so you can get notified whenever we post new content, and then come join us again in a future program. This and the other programs in the 4-week Fast Track series, or really any of the DishWithDina programs and services that exist out there, we always try to launch you in just a new direction, but we don't really assume or guarantee success. It's only with your continued effort, the stuff that's on your part, on your end, with repetitive measures, ongoing practicing, trials and errors along the way, that you will end up developing new habits that stick. And again, one of the keys to having any new habit become a part of your everyday routine or a normal part of your life is to be prepared and be patient with yourself. Spending a few hours at the beginning of every week kind of planning and strategizing whatever you need to put into place, plan an action for yourself, tweaking the things that you're doing as you go, figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, can absolutely in the long run save you tons of time and hopefully tons of frustration as well. We've been doing our best to guide you through the following 4 objectives in the past few weeks. The first was to help you become a savvier supermarket shopper. The second was to understand how to read those nutrition facts labels on the back of food packages. The third was helping you create weekly meal plans that work within your schedule and budget. And the fourth and final objective was to help you engage and interact with a community of like-minded people, much like yourself, who are looking to embrace and develop new relationships with food, which, as I've said before, you can easily do here in the comments section on the YouTube channel, or you can head over to our private Facebook group, which is linked below, and engage in the community there. Last week, we gave you a lot of different strategies, 6 to be specific. They were, we called them our DishWithDina philosophies, and they were there for you to gain kitchen confidence, obviously, along the way, but we want to see if you can keep those in mind, how many of those resonate with you, and how many do you apply each week or in the weeks to come as you begin getting more confident and making these habits more regular in your everyday life. So as a reminder, those strategies or philosophies were for you to cook at home more often, to eat the rainbow, which basically just meant to include or incorporate different colors, foods, a lot of variety of different foods within your everyday meals and menus planning, increasing the percentage of whole natural foods and decreasing or just being a little bit more mindful of how much processed foods you tend to eat, buying what's in season when you can, buying only what you need so you can be a little bit more mindful about food waste, and then minding your portion sizes. So making sure that you're eating in a way that is appropriate for you to honor when you're hungry, when you're full. So this week, we want you to begin finally cooking and preparing your meals with an actual plan in mind so that you can get some much needed time back to do other fun things in your life, or just get rid of any stress that you might have had previously in gaining kitchen confidence. Now that you're a little bit more savvy in your kitchen, hopefully this becomes a little bit more streamlined. But we also want you to start being mindful also of the food group. So I mentioned last week we're going to talk about that this week, and I promise you we still will, so that the meals that you create can be really simple and budget friendly, but also you're making sure that you're giving yourself enough energy and nutrient density is really what we're going for here. So for me, the way that I do this is one of 2 ways. I'm going to share that with you. You can maybe do the same thing, one of 2 ways. You can either let your meal plan guide your shopping, right? So you have an idea of what you want to do and you're going out to get the ingredients for that, or you can let the shopping guide the meal plan. And I'll explain that in a sec. I tend to actually prefer the former. So based on what I have on hand, I decide on recipes that I know I want to make, and then I will shop or fill in the blanks with any of the remaining items and nothing more. If I do it the other way around, if I do the latter, where I'm letting the shopping guide me and I'm kind of wandering aimlessly, along my grocery store or the farmer's market, and I don't have a clear idea or plan in mind when I'm doing the shopping, that I might get kind of distracted or enticed by, whatever's on sale, maybe some featured items. If I am at, say, a farmer's market, oh my gosh, the smells and the colors and engaging in conversation with the vendors there, I might just pick things up. And then when I come home, I might have to force myself to create a menu based on what I just bought without a plan in mind. So if I do end up selecting any items or ingredients that don't necessarily go together, or I end up having too much of one thing and not enough of something else, then I'm stuck, right? So not only am I back at square one, but I'm more likely to toss out any unused, especially perishable items or surplus at the end of the week. So I really try to encourage everyone to come with a plan in mind when they go shopping. The only times that I might do this the other way around is, like I said, if I'm feeling inspired, if I really have an empty kitchen or an empty pantry and I want to be creative and I want to engage in the discussions or see what's at the grocery store or at the farmer's market, and maybe want to try something completely new. What is on sale? What's in season? And again, if I have a lot of time to work on those things, when one of these new ingredients are picked up when I get home, then that's fine. I'll let that shopping trip guide my meal plans. Regardless of which of those ways you choose to move forward from this point on, be sure that you have a variety of food groups as often as possible. In fact, let's take a minute here just to share in the comments, if you don't mind, what have you been noticing about the patterns and eating habits in the past few weeks, especially since you've started watching these videos? What foods specifically, or food groups, or patterns, as we said before, are you most drawn to? What flavors do you enjoy eating? Which do you tend to shy away from? What will you absolutely never try, or something that you've completely been turned off from, whatever reason? Feel free to comment below. As promised, here it comes. We're finally about to review the food groups this week. So as you can see here, plant-based foods, you've heard that term before, I'm going to assume, give you the most variety, but a lot of nutrition can also be found in animal foods. So it just depends on your preference. Get used to visualizing your day as a balance of all of these things. For example, say you're starting your day with eggs and toast, a traditional breakfast here in America. This is categorized, as far as the food groups are concerned, as a protein, the eggs, and grain, the bread. Then maybe include other food groups over the rest of your day, especially colorful things like fruits and veggies, which, as you remember from last week's video, contains, pop quiz, the vital phytonutrients and antioxidants to help support your health. And of course, to confuse you further, the food groups that we're discussing here and that you see on that MyPlate graphic, they are not the same as something called macronutrients or macros. Again, I'm not entirely sure if you've heard of all of these names or terms before, so I'm going to break it down a little bit right now. So the food groups, as we said, were noted on that graphic as fruits, vegetables, dairy, grains, and protein. Macronutrients, however, is the umbrella term. Macronutrients are the umbrella groups of what we call carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. These we get from pretty much everything that you can get in your diet. They're broken down by our body and used for very specific cellular functions and to provide us with energy. So we get calories from the macronutrients broken down into our body, and then we can utilize that either to move around, have energy to move around, or if our body requires certain functions, then that's where that comes from. So many of these food groups that you see here, they do contain a mix of carbs and proteins and fats, but some could potentially be higher in certain macronutrients, or different ratios, I should say, than others. So for example, whole grains, right? Brown rice, quinoa, I guess, would also be considered a whole grain in that way as well. Whole wheat product, whole wheat bread and flour in that respect. Those contain mostly carbohydrates. Some protein, believe it or not, is in there, and also some fat. If you are, versus say like a piece of salmon, so if you're comparing this to a piece of fish or a piece of meat, depending on the cut of it or how you're cooking it, those items, those animal products there, the salmon and the steak, those usually contain mostly protein and fat, whether it's good fat or healthy fat or unhealthy fat, but very few carbs. So you're not getting a lot of carbohydrates. And again, your body needs different macronutrients for different things. So this is why varying your foods over the course of your day can definitely help you meet all of these requirements, your macronutrients requirements as well, which we'll go a little bit into detail on macronutrients in probably a future program. You do not have to have all 5 food groups represented in every meal. In fact, it might not really make sense to do that as far as what kind of flavors you enjoy or how hungry you are. But over the course of the day, and definitely over the course of the week, like the week on average, you should be able to look back and say you've pretty much hit every one of those, or at least enough of those food groups to cover what you need to support your overall health and give you enough energy as well. So let's take a look at the weekly meal plan template that's linked below. It has a grid that you can date, and that's at the top right there. And then there are sections here for meal plans and snacks for the week for yourself, or obviously if you want to include anything for people in your household, your family, whoever you're cooking for or planning for. And then at the bottom, there are these food group icons that you should now be familiar with, and the little check boxes that are next to those as well. So this kind of correlates to that MyPlate daily checklist that we referred to a couple of weeks ago. And then last week for your homework assignment, I had asked you to please look up the MyPlate daily checklist that was very correlated to the calorie requirements that you were calculating for yourself as well, and the daily servings of the foods, making sure that they were kind of like specific to you. Just to give you an idea of like, what a day in the life of you should be like if you're staying spot on to that. Well, this is the week that you kind of take all of that into account. And so when you're ready to design your weekly plan, you can mark off these corresponding checkboxes so that obviously, if you want to keep track of what you might be missing in your meals or anything that you might be maybe going over on or excessively consuming, like, grains on their own, rice and so on, they're great. They have a reason to exist, but they're not necessarily as nutrient dense as vegetables and proteins. So this is why I think not to be hyper obsessed over something like this at all, but just to kind of give yourself a baseline of understanding this is who I am, and these are my patterns, and seeing if you're over or under in any particular way, what you might be missing, and then add that onto your plate. So let's talk about carbohydrates for a second, right? So I mentioned before about the macronutrients, and this is one of the macronutrients. So especially if you're managing diabetes, this always correlates directly to a carbohydrate discussion. So you might have been told by a healthcare professional, doctor, dietitian, to watch your carb intake. Now, you can get carbohydrates from pretty much every food group, especially plants. That's all that's in there. But the thing that we're really looking for is sometimes what are called the more refined carbohydrates, like certain grains and some fruits, because they may spike your blood sugar levels, where something that is a more complex, fibrous, nutrient-dense type of carbohydrate food like beans, nuts, leafy greens, those may not spike your blood sugar as much. Because the food groups are separated out, the grains on that little MyPlate graphic there, instead of lumping them into a carbohydrate family, you're just going to visually monitor and control anything that happens to be an issue for you. So grains might not be the culprit. Maybe starchy vegetables might be an issue for you if you're managing diabetes, or maybe you can do some fruits, but say bananas or tropical fruits like pineapples and mangoes, those will spike your blood sugar. So just keep in mind that everything on that MyPlate graphic, even though it's separated into food groups, covers quite a span when it comes to the carbohydrate discussion. Here is my calendar and weekly meal plan as an example. You can see that I eat pretty much the same thing every 2 or 3 days, especially during weeks where I know I'm going to be going out or eating outside of my home often. I do bring food with me, so even the days that I'm working outside, that I'm traveling, I'll have meals listed on my meal plan so that I can allow for that amount, and that I'm making sure I'm getting the proper kinds of foods and that macronutrient and food group distribution that I know is going to sustain my health and not just keep me full. And also, obviously, it's like a prompt for me to make sure that I don't walk out of the house without grabbing my lunch or my snack or whatever meal I'm taking with me. According to my own MyPlate daily checklist and my calorie requirement, I should tell you, sometimes it varies 1,800 calories, 2,000 calories, depending on how active I am. So I should be taking in X number of servings, daily servings of particular food groups that is associated with my caloric intake based on, again, that MyPlate daily checklist. But I know for me that I actually function best, I will say, like GI, gastrointestinally, and also just energy-wise. I think I function best when I focus mostly on protein, things like eggs, and plant-based proteins as well, like beans, and then hearty vegetables like leafy greens and sweet potatoes with some healthy fats thrown in there. So that's not, healthy fats isn't pictured as a food group, unfortunately, in the MyPlate daily checklist or in the food groups graphic there. But things like avocado, which botanically speaking is technically a fruit, and nuts, which are often looked at as a plant-based protein, those have healthy fats in them. So for me, that makes more sense in my life versus something that might be a little bit more quote-unquote carb dense. So these foods that I just got done talking about, except for the eggs, they all have carbohydrates, but the ratio of those macronutrients in those particular food items are not carb dense. They have a lot of other things going for them. They have more proteins and healthy fats for me. So for me, that works for me. I'm also, I will share with you, lactose intolerant, as I know a lot of my fellow Americans here are. So except for some yogurt and hard cheese, I usually have some issues digesting dairy products, so I don't really comply with the dairy recommendation that's on that MyPlate daily checklist. I also have somewhat of a wheat intolerance, so I think that's also why I shy away from certain grains, and I tend to limit that as far as my grain intake. So there you can see on the top half of the MyPlate food group graphic, or in the list of the food groups on the checklist, I'm, kind of doing a little bit shy of certain things and a little bit more of other things to make sure I'm still getting the calories that I need in my diet every day to sustain my energy so that I can walk around and not pass out from hunger, but I'm not necessarily getting those recommended servings of each individual food group because I don't really like a lot of them. So let's move on to the template here, where on the same thing I was talking about with the meal plan template, we actually included a little daily water consumption section and physical activity. So if you feel like incorporating those habits in things that you would like to track while it's not exactly in the scope of this particular program, water consumption, hydration, physical activity, movement, that type of thing. But you're more than welcome to include that in your own healthful lifestyle habits and keep them in mind. So we just thought that that would be a good thing to have S factors added onto that template. It's kind of like all one-stop shopping on the same sheet. Let's discuss budget. And by budget, I'm talking about both time and money, two very, very important resources. The first recommendation is to forward plan. Plan ahead. You're going to look at your calendar for the coming week. You're going to get a realistic idea of when you will be home or on site, any late nights that you might have, whether it means at work or at functions, any times where you are going to be eating out or dining in, sitting in a restaurant, any lunchtime appointments that you might have with clients or coworkers, any events that are coming up, whether it's social functions. Basically, are you bringing food with you? Are you preparing food for yourself, or is someone else providing it to you? The other thing is being conscientious of when you will actually have the time, when you're going to be able to prepare and cook your meals for the week. And so, for example, if you're doing grocery shopping on a particular day, I mentioned I usually do it on Sundays, will you have the time in that day or in that time block to unpack everything, chop, slice, dice, cook, wash, clean, dry your pans, etc., put everything away? Or do you not feel like sacrificing an entire afternoon to do that? You might have to split it up in a couple of installments, in other words. The other thing, too, is setting aside time and money, as I mentioned before. So how much of both of those things do you want to spend for the week? As we said, anything in season, produce-wise, right, fruits and vegetables, will most likely be budget friendly, but so might certain staple items and packaged goods. Like we said, I believe last week, we talked about eggs, beans, lentils, frozen vegetables. All of those are pretty much budget friendly year round. If you are short on time, you might want to purchase something that is already prepared for you, so something that is a convenience food, but take into consideration that when someone else is doing the work for you, it's going to cost you money. So it might be more expensive and you might have to budget some money aside for that. If you can afford the time but want to save on money, you don't want to spend extra for these convenient foods, then you can purchase the whole item that you will be in charge of preparing. So for instance, a whole chicken that you will skin and debone, or fruits and vegetables that quite literally have everything on them, roots and stems and leaves and everything. You're just going to grab that whole bunch and take it home and clean and chop and clean up all that stuff on your own. Based on your weekly inventory list, right? You're doing your weekly inventory that we've gotten you into the habit of doing at this point. Start thinking of meals that you can make to get you through the week. So mix and match what you already have on hand. Use that stuff up. Try to be as efficient as possible. Create meals that give you leftovers for the nights where you don't want to add any more on your plate, no pun intended, but be flexible too. So if you do things with your family, like, or on your own, or your friends, like pizza night, or you're going out for Mexican, try not to have too many things that are left over because you might not use them up and you'll have to toss them out as unused at the end of the week. There are plenty of websites and smartphone apps like supercook.com, and here in the States we have Whole Foods Markets, so they have a recipe site as well that can actually help you generate recipes based on the ingredients that you have on hand. So you just plug those in, look stuff up, and it gives you a recipe. You can also be inspired by other people's things, right? Other people's recipes and foods. There's something called foodgawker.com, Pinterest, Yumly, those mason jar recipes that I gave you a couple of weeks ago. I will link to all of those again below, but do searches online. I mean, this is the internet age. You can see whatever you want to look for. You know, you'll have it at the ready. In other words, there's no shortage of creative ideas out there. And then now that you have an idea of what to make and the foods that you have on hand or have to purchase, start plugging in your meals. You can use the template that we gave you, write down your weekly meal plan, and have at it. If you're cooking for others in your home, odds are that merely multiplying the amount that you would have for yourself by the number of people at every meal will give you enough to spare and hopefully then some. So when you're making those recipes, especially we're talking like savory meals, not baking, that's a whole different science there as far as calculations are concerned. See how many leftovers you end up at the end of the week. Was it too much, too little? And then adjust accordingly going forward. We want to make sure that you're not wasting any food, but that you have enough for everybody. And if there are folks in your house that you can recruit to help you out, do it. Oh my gosh, it makes so many things go so much faster when you have a ton more hands. I mean, if you're like me, as I mentioned before, my kitchen's very small. Not a lot of people can fit in here. And truth be told, I don't like when people get in my way when I'm cooking. But if I had the delegation tasks to assign to people, then by all means, I would be all, you chop and slice and dice this. You're in charge of washing up as we go. You set the table. Things go much quicker. And I really do think that when everybody gets involved, they all appreciate the time and effort that goes into feeding them such healthful and yummy foods. Be creative. Do not overburden yourself with anything that's going to require too much prep or cooking time, especially as we said, if we're working on this weekly type of process, we don't, or especially like that will force you to track down a lot of different specialty ingredients from more than one or two stores. I would say we recommend save that just for like special occasions where you're doing something very elaborate. Just try to go with staple things, very easy. I think I said before, 30-minute meals, 5 ingredients or less, like very simple things that you can do with a couple little creative things here and there, but nothing too fancy that's going to throw you off schedule, time, money, etc. Instead, our suggestion is to recommend you spotlight one ingredient in multiple ways throughout the week. For example, can that chicken that is in the freezer be used for one night's dinner and then another day's lunch? Or in a sense of like creative scrambled eggs, right? Scrambled eggs is not something we think that can be carried over into a leftover meal, but if you're doing something for breakfast and it's hot, can you maybe save some extra that can be used up in maybe a sandwich wrap the next day? Are you going to cook in batches or divide up portions or serve the same thing over and over the course of the week? Or will you prepare and cook specific ingredients like I do that you can mix and match in different ways again, over the course of the week. I think I mentioned to you guys a couple of weeks ago, that's what I do. I cook in batches, but I do separated ingredients, and then I just throw everything in their own separate containers. And then over the week, I'm like, oh, this is now a side dish, and this becomes the main meal. And it kind of gives me the illusion of having something different, even though technically it's all the same food. What will be your grab and go items? So will you need to transport anything to a different location, be it an office or your car, so that you can eat while you're traveling or wherever else you happen to be going? Remember some of my standbys that I showed you a couple of weeks ago and last week as well. Mason jar salads keep coming up. The salad dressings that I do homemade wise, which can last months in the refrigerator. The hard-boiled eggs that I mentioned. I showed you, I write the dates on mine so you can see that in the photo. Smoothies are a great option to have on hand as well. Those could be grab and go too. One-pot meals, one-pan meals, all of those things can be your standbys, especially on weeks that are very, very busy for you. So officially, let's get to it. Your week 4 homework assignment. Be sure to plug these into your activity log. As always, that will help you keep track, and you can check items off as you go. As always, be sure to fill out your goal agreement sheet. This is week 4, final week. You're done. Finish up and see what is left as far as what you maybe haven't accomplished so far or something else that you want to add. Some suggestions might be to eat out less often this week, to cook home twice a week, to try the next new fruit or vegetable that happens to come out in season. Whatever it is that you decide to do, be sure to reward yourself or someone else and celebrate those little small victories when you achieve those goals. The second item, as always, is to inventory your kitchen. However, this time you're going to write down only what you have on hand, and then you're going to stop there, and you can kind of reflect and take a look and see, by this point, perhaps you're only keeping the absolute essentials in your kitchen, and then you're going to pick up stuff that you need, obviously, when you're in the next week or two and going shopping. If there are still things that are lingering that have been in your kitchen for this many weeks, try to find some way, some recipes that you can kind of use those up and get rid of all that stuff. If there's anything that you've missed as far as expired foods, obviously toss them. And if there's anything you no longer want or need or bought too much of the last time you went out, as we've always suggested, please make sure that you donate them to perhaps a more less fortunate family in your neighborhood or a local food pantry. Be sure to check your calendar, right? We mentioned planning forward. You're going to look ahead and see when you're home, the nights that you might be going out, events that are coming up, and you're going to check your calendar, and then you are going to create your weekly meal plan. You'll plug in the foods that you're planning on eating and preparing them for that week, and then you're blocking off anything that you're not going to have to really be in charge of. So if you're going out to eat or there's going to be food available to you in whatever time of day that is throughout your week, you'll just block that off. You don't need to cook or prepare or bring food with you for that. When you go grocery shopping, now you have a whole arsenal, hopefully, of tools and strategies at your ready for whatever foods that you're needing. The label reading we discussed, you can implement all of that as well when you're going grocery shopping, and you have now achieved being a savvier supermarket shopper. Visualize your weekly meals at a glance. Like when you're writing all these things down, kind of see the food groups in your head, and of course you can check off those boxes that are on the template. Comment below or hop onto our private Facebook group and share with us your successes and challenges, any pictures that you want to show us that have to do with the colorful meals that you've been preparing. Let us know if you've been meeting your weekly goals or if you need our help and encouragement to move you along the way. Feel free to ask questions at any time. I said we are always happy to guide you with whatever food and nutrition questions you might have. Keep an eye out also. I mentioned I do these little live Q&As every now and then, so if you happen to see me pop on and promote one of those things and you want to join me live, that's cool. If not, they're usually recorded for future viewing, so you can always check them out later on. And then because this is the final week in our 4-week program, we want to make sure that we get some input from you. So we're going to link to a program survey, and we'd love if you can provide us with some feedback so that we can improve not only this if we happen to revise it at a later date, but also any programs that we're creating for future use. But also it's going to give you a chance to evaluate yourself and how your participation was in this program. So whatever you think you could have done better, differently, or if you feel like maybe we were a little bit off and you couldn't catch up, then by all means you can share that information with us in the program survey, which will be anonymous. Lastly, you can schedule a personalized nutrition consult with me. Usually these are just about 15 minutes, real quick check-ins, but if you need something a little bit longer, I do have some different fee-based services that if we're a good fit for each other, you can always check in with me and we can decide where to move from there, especially if you need help managing a chronic condition. So to wrap this up, everything that we've discussed in this video, the downloadable materials, the resources that we mentioned, all are going to be linked below. We thank you so much for letting us help you embrace and develop new relationships with food, and we absolutely hope that we see you again in the future.